Hello and welcome to the Tough Cover Podcast. I'm your host, Mark Henry Jr., and thank you for joining us after a hiatus. And we have a great show and an even better guest for you guys with my guy, Jon Jansen, host of The Line Change on Fox PHL Gambler, a show in which I'm often a guest on. So, Jon, how does it feel to be on the other side of the equation as the guest? How we doing?
I'm doing good, man. Yeah, this is usually the side I'm not ready for. You know, I'm usually the one asking questions, not trying to answer them. So let's see if I actually have any good answers for once instead of good questions. If they're even any good, they're probably terrible questions.
My questions will not match the questions that we hear on The Line Change. I was trying to get all these numbers down because I'm a stat geek. So I focused a little bit more on that. But me and Jon are big fantasy football guys. I did my QB and my tight end previews on here. I know he watched and we ended up talking about him on his show. So before we get into some fantasy talk, everyone please go subscribe to The Painted Lines on YouTube or follow at The Painted Lines on Twitter. And you can follow our guest, Jon, at JJansen34 right there on the screen. And as always, you can follow me at Mark Henry Jr. _ and at Tough Cover Pod on Twitter. Like I said, I did my QB and tight end previews. I decided we had to do wide receiver with Jon. We'll do running back later this week, but we're going to go down my top 40 wide receivers, get Jon's reaction a little bit, and we'll be talking PPR scoring and also talking about the differences in rankings Jon uses over at Win Daily Sports, as you see behind him on the green screen behind. Green screen's probably not the right word, but
no, this is real. This is a thing. It's a nice banner in the back here. It's nice.
I couldn't decide what the right word for that is. The press
you just use the green screen.
Yeah,
everybody uses is it called a green screen in Zoom or is it a backdrop? Yeah, I don't know what like the Zoom thing is that everybody uses, and it always looks terrible because any movement and you could see like what's actually behind them. But no, this is real as it gets. I'm all natural, baby. I'm all natural.
And you can follow them, like I said, at Win Daily Sports. But before we get into those rankings, what stands out to you about the wide receiver position going into fantasy draft season?
For the past couple of years, I've been doing the same thing early on in the terms of I want to get a running back in the first round, probably 2 rounds, and then I can get all my wide receivers after. But I've been finding myself more and more willing to take like some of these top wide receivers because, I mean, they've separated themselves a bit. Like Calvin Ridley, I think is going to be great. Stephon Diggs, Devontae Adams, Tyreek Hill. You know, I'm much more willing, I think, to take those guys because they, to me, now seem a little bit more safer than some of the running backs. Now, I still like some in the back end of the first round, especially like Nick Chubb, Jonathan Taylor. But I am much more willing to look at those wide receivers in the first round. And because that might just be because I actually like some of the running backs in the second and third rounds. But it's definitely a bit of a change. I'm not usually used to because I'm usually running back in drafts.
No, I'm usually that way, and I still am that way this year, but there are at least 3 guys who you'd have to consider as first-round picks here as wide receiver, and you can make an argument for 5 probably. I mean, if you really wanted to stretch it. But like you said, touching on the safety thing, these guys are definitely safer than most of the top running backs, I'd say.
Absolutely.
But the issue is obviously position scarcity. So running backs, you don't have, guys ranked in the 30s who I think could finish in the top 10 really, because it's receivers just so deep. But these guys at the top and that tier 1 where you guys have it on Win Daily Sports, I agree with it. I have a little bit of a different ranking, but that tier 1, my rankings are Tyreek Hill at 1, Diggs at 2, Devontae Adams at 3, which is different than most, Hopkins at 4, and then Ridley at 5. But I don't think you can go wrong with any of those 5 guys. I think those 5 guys are all, they should be ranked between that 9 to 15 area, 9 to 16 area. If you take them near the back end of the first round towards the front end of the second round, I think you'll get great value out of those guys.
Yeah, that tier 1, I mean, it's kind of interchangeable. Like you can, I mean, I think you can have Calvin Ridley at your 1 if you really, thought about it or wanted to make a bold statement that I don't think would be too bold. But, I think you can make an argument for Calvin Ridley to be your 1. I think you can make an argument for DeAndre Hopkins, all of those guys. So, yeah, I just think it's those 5 guys, though, because once you get outside of that, DK Metcalf, not any concerns, but it's just I don't think he's going to get the same type of volume, the same type of usage, the way Adams definitely will. Stephon Diggs, yes, there's plenty of other wide receivers in that offense, but it's such a high volume passing offense, and Stephon Diggs gets so much of that attention. DeAndre Hopkins, the same thing. If I keep hearing they brought in all these weapons, DeAndre Hopkins is going. Stop it. This guy's going to be flat out the number one guy. If Clint Kingsbury is stupid enough to go away from DeAndre Hopkins for AJ Green or Rondell Moore or Christian Kirk, then he should get fired on the spot, which I think he should anyway. But DeAndre Hopkins to me is he's foolproof. You can't mess it up. The Cardinals can't mess it up, and you can't mess it up as a draft pick. So yeah, all five of those guys I think are clearly above the rest.
Yeah, touching on those two guys, Hopkins and Ridley, because everyone knows those top three guys. I mean, those top three are the top three almost on every site. Those are the top three every ADP pretty much. Hopkins and Ridley are pretty much 4 and 5 everywhere. But like you said, you could make an argument for either of them as your wide receiver one. I mean, Hopkins in his first year there, obviously there's probably some growing pains there. He wasn't right away ready to be in that offense. 115 catches, 1,407 yards, and 6 touchdowns. He was a little bit boomer bust. You'd think that maybe becomes a little bit more consistent this year. Maybe that touchdown production goes up and he could easily be in that top 3. And I'm saying it like he had a bad year. He was the number 4 receiver in fantasy last year. And same with Ridley, who was the number 5 receiver in fantasy. And that's why this tier 1's so clear. These top 5 guys finished in the top 5 last year. Ridley was number 5, 90 catches, 1,400 yards, 9 touchdowns in 15 games. I mean, that was with Julio for half the year. Obviously, Pitts is there, but you have to think that Ridley is at least going to get the same target share and the same looks that he got. So those top 5 are definitely a tier above that next tier.
Yeah, and look, with Ridley, to me, there are, if you're going to draft him as the number 1, number 2 guy, there are some things that I do have kind of questions about. Is this offense going to be exactly the same? And will it be enough for a guy like Calvin Ridley to have those kind of yards? What's Calvin Ridley like when he doesn't have Julio Jones on the opposite side? I know we've seen a little bit of that, but coming into this season now, everybody knows Calvin Ridley is number 1, and that's it. The second guy is Russell Gage. I mean, the second guy probably is going to be Kyle Pitts, and why I like him a ton. But yeah, Calvin Ridley, a couple of those questions, but if things are relatively the same and go the way I think we all expected to with that passing offense, Matt Ryan doesn't regress, stays pretty much the same, we can expect those numbers from Calvin Ridley to be just as good, if not better. So I don't think it's too much risk. It's just that if you are going to draft a number 1, number 2, I think there should be in the back of your mind, okay, here are some of the concerns that I should have, and am I okay with that little bit of risk drafting him that high? For sure. I think you mentioned the whole, is he going to be the same guy across the side from Julio? I was one of those guys a couple of years ago who bought all the way into Juju Smith-Schuster. Right.
And it has pained me since. I have him ranked stupid low on this, and it might be you can blame that on being burned too many times. But Juju was a guy who we saw that with. He took a step back once you took AB away from him. Once he was that number 1 guy that defenses were focusing on, he definitely took that step back. I think Ridley is just more supremely talented than Juju was. So I think we're both on the same page.
And look, he is a quarterback that I don't think is going to regress the same way kind of Ben has. I think there are some other, other in that context, other things that led to that. A little bit was Juju Smith-Schuster was the number 1 guy now. He wasn't as talented, and the offense wasn't as good. But all of those factors aren't there for Calvin Ridley. I think he's more talented. Could he see some struggles? He's getting double teamed a lot, and things sort of not go particularly well at times. Yes, but I think the adjustment's going to be made, and he should be fine for most of the year. And I think he's going to be a top 3 wide receiver.
Yeah, so then my next tier, my tier 2, I think on Win Daily Sports, you guys have it from 6 to 18, that next tier. For me, I look at it a little bit smaller, just from 6 to 12. And my number 6 is someone who you won't see it number 6 on any receiver lists most places. Most places have him more so 10 where Win Daily Sports has him. Allen Robinson from the Chicago Bears. He's a guy I've been pumping up all offseason. I think I've talked about him on John's show. I think that Allen Robinson is going to be a superstar this year. I think he has wide receiver 1 upside. And I don't say that about many players, but 102 catches, 1,250 yards and 6 touchdowns last year. 2 years ago, he had 98 catches for 1,200 yards and 7 touchdowns. He was the number 9 wide receiver last year, 16 games in both of the last 2 years. So all those injury concerns that he's had in the past, you have to think you kind of have to put those in the back of your brain since he's played 2 straight full years. And he has never played with a competent quarterback at all. And I'm not saying Andy Dalton's one, but after he gets destroyed in week 1 and they put Justin Fields in there for week 2, and we've seen how Fields looks so far in the preseason, I really like what Allen Robinson will possibly be able to do with a guy like Justin Fields back there creating more. And I don't think his target share is going anywhere. I like Darnell Mooney as a late guy, as a late dart throw. I think Allen Robinson's going to get the same crazy target share that he's been getting, and I think he'll be even more productive and efficient.
Yeah, that's not going to go away. Like, he is quarterback proof no matter what. Like, that's not going to go away. But what does have the encouraging signs of he could be better is actually Mitch Trubisky wasn't that bad at the end of the season. Like, I think everybody forgets that. Like, he was actually a competent, okay quarterback. And what Mitch Trubisky was at the end of the season is likely what Dalton's going to be for however long he starts. And then Justin Fields could be some growing pains, but he's talented enough and the arm strength enough that if Robinson's open, it's really easy for a rookie quarterback. Look at Robinson, throw it to Robinson. But with the way Mitch Trubisky played, you kind of saw some of those big games. You saw, 13 targets and 8 grabs for 74 yards and 2 touchdowns against Green Bay. You saw 13 targets, 9 catches, and 123 yards against Houston. Towards the later half of that season, week 12 and on, he benefited greatly. And that's just with decent quarterback play. So I think, Andy Dalton is going to be that same level of, I think, quarterback play that Trubisky was towards the end of the season. And I do think we see a bit of an uptick this year because it's going to be, I think, not consistent in terms of who's going to be a quarterback, but just consistent enough quarterback play that he does maybe make his way into the top 5 or at least close. Yeah,
he's just the guy that I've been targeting in the back end of that second round, front end of that third round, even in front of this guy up next, who most people have as that 6th guy outside of that top 5 tier, in DK Metcalf, who was the number 7 wide receiver last year, 83 catches, 1,300 yards, 10 touchdowns, huge breakout year. The one thing that I looked at as a little bit concerning, only 11 points per game down the stretch in the last 5 weeks when Seattle went to a stupid, much more run-based approach out of nowhere after Russ was the MVP halfway through the year. But there are 2 ways to look at that. One is that if they commit to throwing like they did for the first 10, 11 weeks, he has top 3 upside, and he probably would have finished there if they would have had that same philosophy throughout the whole year. But the way I'm looking at it is I could be a little scared off because everything they've said this offseason is that they want to pound the rock. They want to run the ball. So that is a little bit scary that they went away from DK a little bit towards the end of the year and just went away from the passing game in general and spread it around a bit more.
Yeah, that stretch that Wilson had, because it was probably part of the play calling, but it was also a stretch of games that Russell Wilson was just really bad. After, like, there were 2 extremes. Like, he was an MVP, like by far MVP for the first few games of the season. Then there was this bit of regression. So I think with Wilson, you're going to see a little bit more consistent play. Like, I just feel like that was Russell Wilson's been around for so long, and we see it with Aaron Rodgers too. Like, some seasons aren't as good as others, but there are the great seasons. There are the anomalies where it's a few bad weeks that are stringed together. But I think we see a much more consistent Russell Wilson. I don't think the passing game is going to be that bad. I think they're going to work on it, and I don't think we're going to see the same inconsistency problems we saw last year. So yeah, DK Metcalf for me. He's being ranked appropriately, drafted appropriately. I don't think he's going to be, I'm not drafting him too high or too low. I think he's right now perfect where he's at, but he's a guy that I'd be willing to take, if he falls to me in a draft.
Agreed. I have him right there in that back end of the second round. And if the reason I haven't been ending up with him is because most of the time that DK Metcalf's available, Allen Robinson is going to be available, obviously. So that's just how rankings work. But DK Metcalf, if someone were to take a Rob right in front of me and DK fell to me at, I have a pick this weekend, the 4th pick, if he fell back to me in the second round, I'd be absolutely happy with DK Metcalf. And then another guy that you have to look at that in the back end of the second round, front end of the third round is Keenan Allen. I think everyone has him in that back end of the top 10 in wide receivers. Number 13 wide receiver last year in the first year with Herbert in 14 games, 100 catches, 992 yards, 8 touchdowns. This guy is just Mr. Consistency. Has been between 97 and 104 catches, 992 yards and 1,200 yards, 6 to 8 touchdowns in the last 4 years. Just extremely consistent. And now I think there's even an unlocked upside with a second year with Justin Herbert in a new system. So not much to say on Keenan Allen. Probably we all know what he is, but maybe Herbert does give him a little bit of that upside he was lacking before.
Yeah, look, Keenan Allen, I think has that locked, that number one spot. I don't have any problem with him. It's almost looking at it in a way like the Buffalo offense, like Stephon Diggs is just going to demand the attention. DeAndre Hopkins is just going to demand attention. So is Keenan Allen. What gets interesting though is outside of him, and Mike Williams. I don't think Mike Williams is for sure like the number two guy. I actually think there's a little bit of competition there, and some guys that are going to challenge him for that and take targets away from him. But in terms of Keenan Allen, there is nobody challenging him, so he is safe. I just think outside of Allen, it gets really interesting, the wide receiver group for the Chargers. I was about to call him San Diego. I can't stop that.
I haven't looked much into the depth at wide receiver, but I like Guyton from last year. I liked some of the stuff that Guyton showed. I don't know exactly where he falls on that depth chart, but he definitely showed some chemistry with Herbert and some deep balls last year. So the next two receivers on my list kind of go hand in hand. They were both rookies from last year, and it's going to shock some that I have the guy ranked above the other guy, but I have CeeDee Lamb at number 9, which is a little bit higher than most people have him, and I have Justin Jefferson at number 10. CeeDee Lamb, number 22 receiver last year, number 11 receiver in the games Dak played. 74 catches, 935 yards, and 5 touchdowns, even with Andy Dalton throughout that year, even with Cooper and Gallup both staying healthy for the whole year. I truly think this is a guy who has top 5 upside, and I think he might be posting something similar to that Ridley season we saw last year, something around that 90 to 100 catches, 13 to 1,400 yards, 8 to 10 touchdowns. I really think he has that upside, and maybe even potentially more of a catch upside than Ridley had to get to that 100 catch marker. And then Justin Jefferson, I think we know how good Justin Jefferson is, especially as Philly guys here. But Justin Jefferson was the number 6 wide receiver last year, 88 catches, 1,400 yards, 7 touchdowns. I had him higher earlier this offseason. I'm a bit concerned about this shoulder injury. That is something to be concerned about, that he's not going into the season fully healthy. I'm also a bit nervous that Thielen and Irv Smith are going to cut into his targets a bit more this year. And this is the weird one.
I'm just not in love with that Vikings offense, passing offense as much. It's just I thought we actually saw some regression from Kirk Cousins. And, we remember all the guys were frustrated on the sidelines. I think him and Thielen were yelling at each other. There was a little bit of like, okay, what's going on with Kirk? If this offense is going to do things the right way, they're probably going to just run the ball a ton. Yes, of course, they're going to get Justin Jefferson involved. They're going to get Adam Thielen involved. And Justin Jefferson's going to be fine. But yeah, there's a reason why I think he falls kind of in the back half of that tier 1 or tier 2, of guys. So I like Jefferson a lot. Think he's going to post great numbers. But yeah, it's just I'm not in love with that passing offense as much as I'm in love with Dallas's, because that's going to be high volume. To me, that's going to be, if Kansas City's out the best passing offense in the league, it's going to be Dallas. That's how good this passing offense has been, since Kellen Moore has taken over as offensive coordinator. So I would just rather take the guy in that offense, who I know is supremely talented as well.
Just so the Tough Cover Pod listeners know, I am a Joe Brady guy. That's my offensive coordinator love. Oh,
Joe Brady's great, man.
But I think your Joe Brady is Kellen Moore. You're a Kellen Moore guy.
I'm huge. Well, I may be a little bit biased because one of my favorite college quarterbacks was Kellen Moore at Boise State. But no, it's just the numbers. It just jumped out to me. Like it speaks for itself. Like all of the ranks you see of Dak Prescott, his yards per game, touchdowns per game, quarterback rate, all of it ranks at the top. Like Dallas's passing game since Kellen Moore has taken over has been just outstanding. And I just don't see that being any different. Like, I don't know what would tell me that that's going to change. The only thing that would be somewhat concerning is Dak Prescott's injuries, but I just think they're being super cautious about a guy that hasn't thrown a lot and was injured. But once week 1 gets started, I guarantee you Dak's going to be fine, because Dak has never had injury concerns. And the injury that he did have wasn't like a soft tissue injury, an ACL. It was just his foot got caught in the wrong way and he shattered his ankle, whatever it was. That was just a freak injury, but I think he's going to be fine. And this Dallas passing offense is going to be insanely good.
Yeah, I've concerns he might run less, but that wouldn't hurt CeeDee Lamb. That wouldn't hurt Amari Cooper. Any of these guys we're talking about.
He's become such a good pocket passer. I'm not concerned at all about Dak, being able to be mobile, mobile to the point where I think he can get out of the pocket still. But no, I think he will be reluctant to run more, but that's only going to help him looking down the field and looking to pass the ball more and maybe quicker routes.
And then getting to another two guys I'm going to talk about at the bottom of this tier too. I'm curious to see which guy you like better. I have AJ Brown at number 11. He was the number 11 receiver last year in 14 games, 70 catches, 1,100 yards, 11 touchdowns. And then at number 12, I have Terry McLaurin, and the number 19 wide receiver last year in 15 games, 87 catches, 1,100 yards, and 4 touchdowns. Which do you prefer out of AJ Brown and Terry McLaurin?
I would prefer Terry McLaurin. I am very, very high on McLaurin, and I'm not a big fan of Ryan Fitzpatrick. Like, I think it's actually going to hurt Washington, the fact that he's their starting quarterback, but he's really good for fantasy wide receivers. Like, he was great for Devonte Parker. He was great for in those years that he was with Buffalo, and it just in Tampa Bay, even the first 4 games, like, he was amazing. He's a perfect guy for fantasy wide receivers, and especially one like Terry McLaurin, who was so explosive with the ball in his hand. So I just think the target's going to be there, the production's going to be there, the efficiency's going to be there. AJ Brown is so good because of the efficiency, but I think the targets aren't going to go up at all because Julio Jones is there for a reason. So, like, it is going to be maybe a slight dip in targets and usage. And if there's a slight dip in targets and usage and a little bit of a slight dip in efficiency, because that's why he's so great. He's so great yards after the catch. He's a great deep threat. If that slightly goes down, then I think you're losing kind of all of the value that you like in AJ Brown. Last year was a perfect situation of Corey Davis is not that good, so he demands the attention, and he's really efficient with his targets in an offense that runs the ball a lot, so it works. But I don't like it as much now. I would rather just get Terry McLaurin, who I know is going to get all the things we like. Usage, production, and the fact that he's efficient with his targets as well.
Yeah, Terry McLaurin's a sure thing. He's one of those guys like Allen Robinson because of that.
Do you think people view him that way, though, as a sure
I don't know.
Fantasy receiver?
I don't know, because I don't think people are excited about Fitzpatrick. I think it's the same type of thing with Robinson. I think both of those guys are sure things because we've seen that floor. What that floor is with terrible QB play. These guys have just been incredible with bad QB play. You think that QB play is going to get better this year for both of them, hopefully. So I think that they're both sure things with upside. So McLaurin, I have a spot below AJ Brown just because I think AJ Brown is just an absolute freak. But the more we go, AJ Brown is a guy who has fallen down my list and is not a guy I'm targeting. And AJ Brown, like you said, there's no way he's going to gain targets. He's not going to gain catches. Yeah. He's not a high target, high reception guy anyway.
Unless this offense completely changes with Julio Jones. And the reason why they brought him in there was to go to straight up passing, and they'll save Derrick Henry. But I don't see that changing. Vrabel's going to run the ball. Derrick Henry's going to get, probably the most carries in the league, and they're going to be pretty much a run team. I think when I looked at attempts, Ryan Tannehill had the 18th most attempts, I think, in the NFL. Attempts doesn't mean everything, but it does mean, what quarterbacks are dropping back the most, and Tannehill doesn't. I don't expect that to really change that much because Derrick Henry just demands that many carries.
I do think they'll throw a bit more, but I don't think AJ Brown's going to be the beneficiary. I think the guy who's going to benefit is the next guy on my list. I think AJ Brown is a little bit too high. I think Julio Jones is a little bit too low. So Julio Jones is ranked 17th on Win Daily Sports, and that's about consensus around the industry. I have him 13th. I think Julio Jones is still the same stud that he's been, and I'm not even a big Julio Jones guy, but he was the number 52 wide receiver last year in 9 games, 7 full games, and he was on pace for 100 catches, 1,500 yards, and 6 touchdowns if he would have played out that season fully healthy, which is right on line with where he was the last 2 years. I don't think Julio has dropped off of a cliff, and a lot of people seem to think he has. Obviously, there are injury concerns there, but Julio Jones is definitely a guy that I'm targeting, and then a guy that kind of goes right hand in hand with them, another future Hall of Famer, in my opinion, because Julio Jones is definitely a Hall of Famer. Mike Evans at 14. I think Mike Evans, he was the number 12 wide receiver last year. I talked to someone else who's missing consistency earlier. Mike Evans is Mr. Consistency, 70 catches, 1,000 yards, 13 touches. He's always over 1,000 yards. Was actually even better with Antonio Brown than he was without him. So Antonio Brown actually benefited him in the offense. Evans' role is less affected by AB than Godwin's is, in my opinion. So I still feel comfortable targeting Evans. Who would you prefer to take in drafts, Julio Jones or Mike Evans?
I'd probably prefer Evans just because, again, I think the passing offense there, they're going to throw the ball. It's Brady. And it's just Mike Evans. The only thing with him is just, can you stomach the weeks where it's a Chris Godwin week or an Antonio Brown week? Like, can you stomach the potential, 4 or 5 targets, only a couple catches for 20 yards, a few times. But there are going to be those huge explosive games. They're going to win you fantasy games. And, it could win you fantasy games in the playoffs. But it's just, with Mike Evans, to me, it's not anything of, I don't think he's going to be under 1,000 yards. I don't think his production is going to dip. It's just that, can you stomach the couple or few weeks where he really doesn't do anything because it goes to someone else? And that was always the frustrating part, because last year was a lot of, okay, is it a Chris Godwin week or a Mike Evans week? It's just, that's the problem that's always going to be there. But I think overall, in total, the production is going to still be better than Julio Jones.
And then I'm going to talk about a guy next to round out my top 15 and to round out tier 3 here. And Robert Woods. I'm not sure, you might like him even better than those two guys that I said there.
I actually do. I love Robert Woods because he's not a concern. Like Julio Jones, it's just a new offense. He's getting older. I don't know exactly what he is now in his career, even though he still could be great. I don't know exactly, but Robert Woods is the one. I just know I can just lock him in and be like, I know exactly what I'm going to expect out of Robert Woods.
Yeah, that's definitely fair. And even he's kind of similar to that Robinson McLaurin thing we were talking about, because we've seen that floor with average QB play with Jared Goff. Hopefully you're thinking Matthew Stafford comes in there, he kind of maintains the same target share and hopefully is more efficient due to better quarterback play. And he's been so steadily consistent, steadily in the top 15, around that 90 catches, 1,000 yards, 6 touchdowns, ranging from wherever in touchdowns. And that Stafford bump could help him. But the guy who I really think the Stafford bump is going to help is the first guy in tier 5 for me. And this is one of the guys I like way more than consensus. It's Cooper Kupp as my number 16 wide receiver. He was the number 27 wide receiver last year. He's ranked 29 on Win Daily Sports. He had 92 catches, 974 yards, a similar amount of targets, but he only had 3 touchdowns. His yards per catches and his touchdown production was way down last year. I think that could just be Jared Goff regression and bad luck mostly. So he's another guy who's very consistent week to week. So I decided to rank him over a couple big boomer bust guys that I have up next. And I really like Cooper Kupp. He's a guy that I end up with in drafts a lot this year around that 4th, 5th round.
Yeah, I think he's the one that kind of, was hurt the most by Jared Goff, because I feel like Cooper Kupp is the one that needs kind of efficiency and, accuracy more than anybody, because he's such a high volume receiver. I think he kind of lost some production just because of Jared Goff not being an efficient quarterback. And I think he's going to gain that with Matthew Stafford. I don't know how the Matthew Stafford experiment is going to work, how exactly it's going to look, but he's more accurate than Jared Goff. He's going to be more efficient than Jared Goff. And I think that definitely benefits Cooper Kupp. Look, I like Robert Woods and Cooper Kupp both. Like, I'm drafting them both. This isn't, I'm trying to pick, is it Woods or Cooper Kupp? No, I want them both on my fantasy team. So yeah, Coop will definitely be a guy that I'm definitely looking for.
So then I'm going to round out my 17 to 20. You can tell me after I get through these 4 guys if you think I'm too low or too high.
Criticize you. I'm always, I would love to criticize you.
Oh, I'm all the way down for some non-constructive,
especially after
criticism.
your baseball picks. You definitely. Let's not
even get into that.
That's going to walk with you everywhere until it's over.
That stupid boomer sport. We're talking about a real sport here in football. No, I'm joking. But to finish out my top 20, I have Tyler Lockett at 17, Adam Thielen at 18, Amari Cooper at 19, and DJ Moore at 20. Tyler Lockett is a guy that I've ended up with in a lot of leagues. He was super boomer bust last year, but he was still the number 8 wide receiver, similar to DK Metcalf, really struggled down the stretch. And like you said, that could just be an issue with Russell Wilson. But Thielen, Cooper, and Moore at 18 through 20 are guys maybe that they've burned me in the past. Maybe I'm just not quite as high on the offense, or their target share, I think, might be decreasing. Thielen, Cooper, and Moore are just not guys that I'm targeting in drafts. I have them 18 through 20, but most of the time they're gone by the time I'd be looking at them, or one of those guys that I've mentioned above are there still. So do you think I'm too low or too high on any of those guys?
No, I'll agree on the Cooper Kupp thing because I love Michael Gallup. I think Michael Gallup's such a talented receiver. And look, have we been waiting for it or kind of anticipating Cooper Kupp to fall off? Because, it always happens where he has those few weeks where he just shuts down and doesn't do anything.
Do you mean Amari Cooper, you mean?
Amari Cooper, yes. Amari Cooper, like where he shuts down and doesn't do anything. We're like, okay, is this the end of Amari Cooper? Like Oakland, you had all of those drops. We've kind of been like anticipating or at least me, is like, when is that really going to fall off the wheels? And, I don't think that's particularly this year, but I do think A, CeeDee Lamb jumps him, and B, Michael Gallup's also going to get targets. And, I love Michael Gallup this season. draft Amari Cooper all you want. Fine. I'll be drafting Gallup over his ADP a lot more than I will be Amari Cooper. I just think he is going to work his way into that offense. And look, there may be enough for all three of those guys to get involved. Maybe I wouldn't say all three to get 1,000 yards. I don't know. Is that possible? Could it be possible? You know, Dak Prescott to me could get over 5,000 yards this season. But, you know, obviously that's such a unrealistic expectation to put on somebody. But I think my point is that there is enough to go around that, yes, I get Amari Cooper is going to get his and be fine. But I just think Gallup's going to eat into that a little bit more than people expect because he's just that good.
Yeah, Gallup's one of those guys I'm afraid I have ranked a little bit too low. So I'm going to run by my next three here. Not any guys that I have a lot to say about. Deontay Johnson, I have at 21. I do think in like NFL circles, he's getting like people talk about him like he's the worst receiver ever. He has those drop problems. Right. You look at his numbers. It's pretty crazy how good his numbers were with all the problems that he had, leading the league in drops. 88 catches, 923 yards, 7 touchdowns, number 21 receiver.
It's the targets. And the only thing with Pittsburgh is maybe they run the ball a little bit more. But I expect it to be I don't think it's going to be as extreme as they were last year, like high volume passing offense that's just a bunch of short yardage passes. I think it's going to change a little bit. I do think it opens up a little bit more because Ben's arm is going to get stronger and get healthier. So I do think the offense changes a bit, but I do think you still see a lot of targets go Deontay Johnson's way. And with Ben Roethlisberger getting healthier, being able to throw the ball down the field a little bit more, I do think you see an uptick in just also efficiency of Deontay Johnson with those targets. He went down to 10.5 yards per reception last season. He was at 11.5. I actually think he has probably the most yards per reception this season. He may take a slight dip in targets, but I still think it's going to be close to that 144. And you're going to see him over 1,000 yards for sure this season.
Hell of a comment here from a hell of a name that I'm not going to read out loud, but Gallup is why Blake Jarwin
look at the logo. This is somebody actually took their time to make that logo.
Hell of a logo. I'll be honest. I don't mind it, but Gallup, yeah, that's true though. Gallup, for those three receivers to do well, they're going to have to not throw to the running backs very much, not throw to the tight ends very much, and I think that's going to happen. It's going to
it's three receiver sets, and Darren Schultz is also going to cut some time into the Blake Jarwin as well. Like, it's a lot to go around, but I think this offense is strictly going to be, especially with Dak Prescott too, it's going to be strictly 3 wide receiver sets.
So then 22 is a rookie in Jamar Chase. Not much to talk about there. It's just varying on how high you are on that Cincy offense or how high you are on Chase. I think Burrow's going to just absolutely zero in on Chase. I know the reports haven't been great on him, but I'm pretty high on him.
Those reports are stupid. I hate people taking too much away from training camp. Jamar Chase hasn't played in like a couple of years. Like, wasn't he the one who opted out? Like, I'm pretty sure he opted out last year. So he hasn't been on the field in a while. I'm sure he's getting his feet under him. He's fine. Like, the dude's supremely talented. And I think he's going to be the number one target in that offense. I'll ask you this. Which one do you think suffers from these three? Because say what you want about, this could also be a passing offense and Joe Burrow is great. Zach Taylor's offense isn't going to be that good. Like, I don't think it's going to be that great where you can sustain 3 high target wide receivers. One of them is going to suffer. To me, I think it's T. Higgins.
Yeah, someone just said in the comments that T. Higgins is the guy to own. I won't be owning much T. Higgins or Tyler Boyd. Those are
I think Tyler Boyd can carve himself out, a nice role. I just think you're going to see one of those outside guys, Higgins or Chase, suffer. I just think Chase is much more talented than Higgins. Like, Higgins was good, and I think he was really good with the Bengals last season, but Jamar Chase is just that much better. There's a reason why Higgins was a second-round wide receiver, and why kind of coming out of Clemson, it's like, okay, he's tall, he can catch the ball, high catch radius, but like, he's not really that quick, not really that fast. Jamar Chase is sort of everything to me.
A guy that I'm out on is Chris Godwin, up next at 23. He was the number 32 receiver last year, missed a lot of time, obviously, 65 catches, 840 yards, and 7 touchdowns. He was not very good when AB was in the lineup. It really ate into him. AB was actually the better, more productive receiver while they were in the lineup. I still have Godwin ranked 2 spots above AB, who we'll get to, but Godwin is not a guy I'm targeting. He's not a guy I'm very high on this year.
No, and that's a lot because I like AB a lot. I love Antonio Brown this year, and I'm drafting him at all costs. I keep hearing it more and more now, like, oh, Antonio Brown's the guy. So, like, having the book out on and be like, hey, that's my sleeper this year. It's like, nah, maybe not this year. And like, everybody kind of caught on to, oh, he's going too low. And so now it's kind of out on him that, yeah, you got to draft him, and the value isn't going to be there as much, but I still like him. for sure.
Yeah, I've been saying it for months. I think I even said it on your show. Antonio Brown was going way too late. It was crazy. It's creeping up. It's still not high enough. And I have Robbie Anderson at 24 and Antonio Brown at 25. Those are two guys I still have ranked higher than most. Those are guys. Robbie Anderson was excellent last year with bad quarterback play, 95 catches, 1,100 yards, bad touchdown, luck there. But Antonio Brown was on pace for around 900 or 90 catches, 900 yards plus, and then 8 touchdowns if he would have played a full season. So I think Antonio Brown's going to be even better with a full season there with Tom Brady, who obviously loves him, stayed at his house. So I think Antonio Brown is going to be a huge, huge value this year, even though it's creeping up.
Yeah, I actually, Robbie Anderson is one that's really tough for me because I love the offense he's in. I love the fact that he is talented, and he was great last year. How much is Terrace Marshall going to eat into any of them, DJ Moore or Robbie Anderson? But like the big question is, I know Sam Darnold definitely did not benefit from having Adam Gase, one of the worst head coaches ever in the history of football, as a head coach. I get it, but man, there's a good chance that he just stinks.
I'm in the same boat.
There's a really good chance that Sam Darnold just kind of isn't good. And I'm really worried. I know in Joe Brady's offense, there still is going to be production, but I'm just worried that Darnold just isn't going to be, even nearly as good as Teddy Bridgewater was, who I thought was actually pretty good, serviceable last season. I'm concerned about that. But if everything goes well with Darnold, or at least well enough, I think, Robbie Anderson should be in store for a really good season. It's just, man, the risk you're taking on with just a guy that's, having the ball thrown to him by Darnold, I don't know if I want that risk. It's always in the back of my mind, and always kind of why I pump the brakes a little bit on Robbie Anderson.
Yeah, I'm not a Darnold guy. I cannot stand Sam Darnold personally, but you have to think that Darnold, Robbie Anderson familiarity might outweigh a little bit.
It could help. Absolutely.
That definitely is why I'm not completely shying away. So I have two fun, this guy or that guy for you. So who should be the first selected junior in fantasy drafts? Odell Beckham Jr. or DJ Chark Jr.?
Oh, man. Because I love Jacksonville's offense, but I actually think it's the other junior in Jacksonville, Marvin Jones Jr. That actually
should he be the guy?
I think he's the number one guy, but I like Odell Beckham this year because I think it kind of gets the misconception of the Browns offense got better when Odell Beckham went out. No, Baker Mayfield got better. Baker Mayfield started to get more comfortable. Kevin Stefanski, was easing him into the offense early on in the season. And by the end, he was throwing 300 yards and 3 touchdowns against Tennessee in the first half. It's just, I would have loved to seen Odell Beckham in that offense when Baker Mayfield actually had confidence and knew the offense. And Kevin Stefanski was working, Baker Mayfield into the offense more and throwing the ball more. So I like Odell Beckham a lot. This is the last time. I'm going to give it one more shot. But I actually think it's a legitimate shot in the dark for me. I'll take my chances on it because I think the upside is absolutely there. And an offense is going to be really good. The team is going to be really good. And I just think Baker Mayfield, with as much confidence as he has, it's going to help Odell Beckham a ton.
And Odell should be the guy there. He should be the number one guy still. So I'm also saying Odell personally. But another this or that guy here. At my number 28 and number 29 guys wrapping out this tier, I have Devonta Smith at 28 and Chase Claypool at 29. Two guys that are near and dear to my heart. Devonta Smith, obviously, the Eagle of my favorite Eagle now. He's my guy from college. I had him number 3 in the draft. And then Chase Claypool, a Notre Dame legend. So these guys,
he's really good. Yeah. I am too. I would probably go Smith just because he is the number one guy there. When I know Jalen Reagor's been making these great catches in camp. I get it. But Quiz Watkins is getting first team reps for a reason. They're definitely seeing maybe we got a little bit of something here. I guess what I'm trying to make the point of is I don't think Reagor has that number 2 spot locked down, but it just points out the fact overall that Devontae Smith is very clearly the best wide receiver on this team. He hasn't even stepped on the field yet, barely in training camp has stepped on the field. And everybody's going, yeah, that's the best guy that the Eagles have. So even if this offense is sort of limited, I don't know what Jalen Hurts is going to be as a passer. He put up a ton of yards last year. To me, Jalen Hurts is great for at least fantasy because he is a lot of boom or bust. I don't think, he's going to be Matthew Stafford type, or at least what Matthew Stafford is in his career now. He's going to be a Drew Brees type. I think Jalen Hurts is like, it's either big play or it's going to be disaster. But I think Devontae Smith is so good that you can probably expect a few big plays more than not. So I like Devontae Smith. I think he's going to be good in the Eagles offense. The only thing that worries me is just if the Eagles offense does drop back Jalen Hurts enough for Smith to get that production. But I do think that with him being the clear number one there, you're going to see some pretty big games out of Smith over Claypool.
Yeah, I think Smith's going to cover up a lot of those flaws from Hurts being an underneath guy. I think he's going to be awesome, and he's going to be the guy there. And then, so we're going to wrap out tier 6, 30 to 40. I think all these guys are around the same. And I'm not, the first two guys are guys that are ranked way higher. I'm not too high on them. I'm not sure if you're going to tell me I'm crazy, but I have Brandon Ayuk at 30 and Kenny Galladay at 31. These are two guys that I really like talent-wise. But Brandon Ayuk, I'm staying away from San Francisco pass catchers. I just don't. George Kittle, Brandon Ayuk, Deebo Samuel, they haven't all been healthy at the same time. We really don't know who Trey Lance is going to go to, if he's the guy or if Garoppolo is the guy. We haven't even seen him with all three healthy. So I don't know what the pecking order is there. I think all of them, all three of those guys, their ADPs are just a little bit too rich to me compared to some guys who I see the role with and I see why I should be higher on them. So those are guys that I'm just not targeting. Kenny Galladay at 31, guy who's had injury concerns with a quarterback who I think is the worst in football maybe. So I am not a Kenny Galladay guy just because I'm staying away from the Giants passing attack too. Just there's a couple passing attacks this year that I'm just, I look at the ADPs and I'm out on.
Yeah, Kenny Galladay is one of them. And I love Kenny Galladay. And I actually think Daniel Jones can, at least progress in his career. Like he can get better. Like I think this could be the year where everybody's okay. Daniel Jones, not bad. But even if that were to happen, there is such a limit on a Jason Garrett offense on how good a passing offense can be. Like it's just, I saw somebody put it, I think it was Mario Puig of RotoWire, which was awesome when he said it. It's like a Jason Garrett weighted vest is on Kenny Galladay the entire season. But that's exactly what it feels like, because just Jason Garrett's passing offense isn't high volume. It's very vanilla and pedestrian. Like these routes, there's not a big route tree for all these guys. It's just a really simple, low volume offense passing wise. And I just don't know where Kenny Galladay is going to get. Now, if he was the number one guy there and he gets all of these targets and all of it's going his way, sure, I could think about it. But I just don't think that's the case because Sterling Shepard's good. Like they drafted Toney, and I don't think Tony's going to be like a huge, first year guy, but it's just, they do have so many other options there as well. I don't think Kenny Galladay demands the target share as much as you would need in an offense like that.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And then 32 is a guy I am high on in Laviska Shenault. He's going to be underneath, so I think that's kind of separate.
Give me all of Jacksonville wide receivers. Give me every. I'm not kidding. Give me every single one of them. I think
going to be the slot guy.
Yeah, I think because of it's Jacksonville, their ADPs are at spots that are really juicy for me. So give me all of them. I love him. At
Agreed. Spots. Agreed completely. And then 33, 34 are the guys we talked about earlier with T. Higgins and Tyler Boyd. I have Higgins at 33, Boyd at 34. Guys, I'm kind of avoiding. If I'm going to get a part of that Cincinnati Bengals offense at receiver, it's going to be Jamar Chase, which we kind of talked about before. And then the other thing I talked about at 35, I have Juju Smith-Schuster. I don't care if it isn't logical. He should be way higher than that. Had 97 catches last year. Not very efficient. But I can't do it. He's burned me too many times. I'm done with Juju. I just would rather have Johnson or Claypool.
Yeah, and I'll go back to the Tyler Boyd thing. Like, I do like him there, and this guy has been productive. And he's different than Jamar Chase, and he's different than T. Higgins. Chase and Higgins are both outside guys. Like, very clearly, they're outside guys. Tyler Boyd is the slot receiver, short route guy, so he's going to get plenty of targets. And look, with the way that offensive line is and the way that offense needs to probably get the ball out quickly, and probably they want to protect Joe Burrow after him getting injured last season, I think Tyler Boyd's going to carve himself a really nice role out in this offense. And that's why, to me, it's like pick and choose whether you want Chase or Higgins. And I just think I love the upside with Jamar Chase more than I do T. Higgins. But I think Tyler Boyd still has such a huge role in this offense and isn't really affected by the crowded wide receiver group because he's so different from the other two.
Yeah, I completely agree there. And but I should probably look into having him higher. I just don't see that upside with him necessarily with all those guys
Fair.
there, even with
Yes.
him in the slot. So I'm just a little bit lower on him. And then at 36, Will Fuller is a guy I have. He's got a high upside, but obviously the injury concerns are always going to be the issue.
I can't draft him.
That's fair.
Can't.
It's totally fair.
I'd rather get other guys in that offense too. Like Parker's the interesting one because he's fallen a lot.
Mhm.
And I know it's kind of the thing that's working against him is like Tua and Devonte didn't really work well last year. Like he's not the kind of receiver that Tua likes, but he's still good. And I think with Tua's, I hate to say sleeper because I think he's getting drafted a little bit higher now, but I think Tua is going to be pretty good this year. And he's going to, this offense is going to be tailor-made for his strengths. And a little bit of that is because Jalen Waddle, but I would much rather prefer Waddle and I would much rather prefer Devonte Parker with those ADPs and where they're being drafted than I would Will Fuller. The guy's injured a lot. And, I just don't know, like the deep ball in Houston was great, but I just don't, like Miami, I don't know if they're going to be that type of vertical team necessary for Fuller.
Talk about another guy who I don't see it with and is injured a lot. At 37, I have Cortland Sutton. That's a guy that everyone has in the top 25. It's a guy people love. I don't want any part of the Denver passing attack either. I like Judy more than Sutton, probably just as a player. Honestly, I just never been as high on Sutton as everyone else, and he's been hurt so many times now. I just can't do the Cortland Sutton thing. I can't do the Denver Broncos thing.
Yeah, it's hard because if Drew Lock does end up being pretty good, and that's the thing too. It's like what is Drew Lock going to be, and how long does it take for Teddy Bridgewater to get in there? Because I do think Lock starts the season, and is Teddy Bridgewater going to have the same success outside of that Joe Brady offense? Because there's so much talent to like. I love that wide receiver group: Sutton, Judy, KJ Hamler, Noah Fant, all incredible passing targets. It's just that will Drew Lock be good enough to actually be able to sustain, enough targets and enough, volume for those guys to actually be viable fantasy options. So, look, I like Sutton. The injuries are definitely there. I'd probably take my chance more on a guy like Jerry Jeudy, who I know for sure is a really good wide receiver. And I think, just another year into his career could be really good for Drew Lock. But I like both. And I think if the offense is like, if Drew Lock does improve enough, I think it can sustain two wide receivers for fantasy, but I just don't know if that's going to happen. So I'm at least going to take one, and that's probably going to be Jared Jeudy most of the time.
Yeah, I think the Denver concerns are kind of similar to the Carolina concerns. It's like, can we trust Darnold? Can we trust Locke? It's very similar. Number 38, Michael Gallup's the guy we talked about. It's a guy I'm worried that I have too low here, to be honest. He's definitely a guy that I've ended up with in a lot of drafts. His ADP is too low. If Cooper or Lamb go down, he's a top 20 receiver right away, in my opinion. So, and then to finish out my top 40 and to get John out of here, I have two Alabama guys at 39 and 40, Henry Ruggs, Jalen Waddle. Henry Ruggs is the guy that not a lot of people are high on, not a lot of people like. I still just think if he can make a few big plays happen, there is such a hole in that Raiders offense for a receiver to step up. I know the camp reports about wide receiver have been crazy out of Las Vegas. John Brown can't even get on the field and the first team, but it's been weird what they've been doing over there. But I still think Henry Ruggs has crazy high upside. And Jalen Waddle, if he went to a place that didn't have Parker, didn't have Fuller, Gesicki, Gaskin, all those guys who can catch passes, I'd probably be a little bit higher and a little bit more in on Waddle. But what do you think about those guys?
So I guess Ruggs with where he's being drafted, I get it. I mean, there would have to be such a huge shift to what he was last season. And there could be improvements, and it's even more open now for him to be the guy. But he only had 26 receptions last season. Like, if he does get better, like, how much better is it going to get, though? So I just think Ruggs has sort of a long way to go until I feel comfortable drafting him. But I do like Jalen Waddle a ton. Yes, there are some other weapons there, but Jalen Waddle got targeted specifically by Miami because we have a way of using him in this offense with Tua. We know he's going to be the one that Tua targets and the type of receiver he likes to target. All I've been seeing of how they've been using him in training camp and what he's been doing in training camp, the dude is just so damn good. So I love Jalen Waddle with Tua, and I think they drafted him for a reason because they want to make him the number one guy in this offense. So I love Jalen Waddle a ton.
A ton of reasons to love Jalen Waddle. I think he's the most Tyreek Hill-like player we've seen since Tyreek Hill came into the league. But so if I had to, before we get out of here, if I had to give you one guy, you had to say my guy at the receiver position that you're going to end up with in more drafts than not, or your favorite, you're the guy you're willing to stake your fantasy season on, which guy do you like the most at their ADP?
I'm going to stake it on it because I've been so bullish on like, hey, Trevor Lawrence is the real deal. Like, this guy's amazing. Like, don't be surprised if they actually are kind of good. And Jacksonville has 2 1,000-yard wide receivers and 1,000-yard running back. Oh, and they added to that running back room with a guy who's probably better than that 1,000-yard back. Like, this Jacksonville offense can be good. Yeah, do they have an offensive line problem? Yes, they absolutely do. But Marvin Jones, I think it's over 1,000 yards this season. I think he's the number one target in this offense. So I'd probably stake it out on him. Like, I absolutely love Marvin Jones. But if you want to go a little higher up and one of the top guys, like, I think Terry McLaurin's the guy to have. Him and Ridley this year are going to be, I think, the two. Those could end up being, two guys that end up in the top 3, top 5 this season. I think Terry McLaurin for sure is definitely going to have a great return on investment where his ADP is.
The guy that I'm ending up with like later on is actually the guy you talked about a little bit earlier, Devonte Parker. And when we're talking about late picks, he's in a great spot for his ADP. He really is, for sure. I have him ranked in the low 40s, and I still feel like I'm getting him all the time. Him and Mecole Hardman later on. But my guy this year is CeeDee Lamb for sure. And he was my guy last year. I just think CeeDee Lamb is.
I wanted the Eagles to draft him in the absolute worst way,
so badly. I was desperate for them to move up for CeeDee Lamb. Oh my God. But yeah, CeeDee Lamb, I love him. I think he's a top 10 receiver talent-wise in the league right now as we speak. I think he's going to bust onto the scene this year. I should say break out onto the scene. Bust makes it sound negative. But so that was my top 40 wide receivers for you guys. Thank you for listening. Thank you, John, for coming on. You got any plugs for me?
At J Jansen 34 on Twitter. The line changed. No show tonight because there's a Union game tonight. By the way, go Union. NYCFC game tonight over at Subaru Park. But yeah, at J Jansen 34, WinDailySports.com. As you can see, check out those season-long rankings that you were referencing over at Win Daily Sports. For standard leagues, PPR, half PPR, all of that. And a good promo going on over at Win Daily Sports. $100 off a 6-month membership. Just use the promo code NFL2021. But yeah, that's it. I say that's it. And I just went through like pretty much my entire resume. But yeah.
Everyone go use that promo code. Everyone go check it out. Thanks, John, for joining us. And thanks everyone for listening. Enjoy the drafts.